The first thing you notice after the man you love dies is the silence. It's not a peaceful, calming silence. It's a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating thing that presses in on you from all sides, greedily filling up the spaces he used to occupy with his laughter, his footsteps, his off-key humming. For me, Eleanor, that silence was a roaring monster in our sprawling ranch house outside Austin, Texas. At 34 years old, the word widow felt like a costume I was being forced to wear, itchy and ill-fitting. Mark, my husband of 11 years, my rock, my North Star, was gone. A sudden, massive heart attack at 36, and just like that, the axis on which my world spun had shattered. The days that followed were a surreal parade of sympathetic casseroles I couldn't eat and well-meaning visitors whose hushed tones only made the silence feel louder. I would stand in the gourmet kitchen he had insisted we build, a space meant for joy and gatherings, running my hands over the cool granite countertop. This was where we'd lean and talk for hours, me sipping wine, him a local craft beer, dissecting our days. Now, all I felt was a hollow ache so profound it was a physical pain in my chest. The relentless Texas sun would stream through the large picture windows, lighting up dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, careless ghosts. But for me, the world had been plunged into an inescapable gray. If you've ever felt the sting of family drama, especially when you're at your lowest, when you feel like you can't possibly take one more hit, I want you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because you are going to want to see how this story of breathtaking betrayal and hard-won justice unfolds. It's a reminder that even in our darkest hours, we can find a strength we never knew we possessed. My younger sister, Chloe, had always been a challenge. But her performance at the funeral carved out a new, dark corner in my understanding of her. It wasn't just a few shed tears for the cameras. After I had somehow managed to stumble through my eulogy, my voice breaking on his name, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stand, she decided it was her turn. She swept up to the podium as if she belonged there, a tragic heroine in a play of her own making. I just wanted to say, she began, her voice already thick with perfectly rehearsed tears, that Mark and we had a special bond. A connection that not everyone was privileged enough to understand. She risked a quick, sorrowful glance in my direction, a flicker of something cold and unreadable in her eyes. He used to tell me things. Secrets he couldn't share with anyone else. He knew he could always trust me to understand his soul. A palpable wave of discomfort rippled through the packed chapel. I saw Mark's business partners, stoic, successful men, exchange uneasy looks. I saw our old college friends frown in confusion. My parents, sitting beside me, suddenly became fascinated by the intricate patterns on their own shoes. My mother's hand found my knee and gave it a brisk pat, a gesture meant to be comforting, but it felt like an erasure. "Don't make a scene," it seemed to say. Chloe wasn't sharing a fond memory of her brother-in-law. She was staking a claim on his memory. She was attempting to rewrite our history, implying an intimacy, a depth of connection that had never, ever existed. The truth? Mark couldn't stand being alone with her for more than 10 minutes. He found her constant need for drama utterly exhausting. He was always polite, always kind, for my sake, but he saw right through her desperate theatrics. I remembered a time he'd called her an emotional vampire. A hot, useless rage boiled in my gut. I wanted to stand up, to march to that podium and scream the truth. But I was paralyzed, frozen in my pew by the sheer audacity of her lies, and by the weight of my own crushing grief. I just let her words hang in the air, a toxic perfume poisoning the memory of my kind, decent, loving husband. When she finally finished her soliloquy, dabbing her dry eyes with a pristine tissue, she walked past my pew. She squeezed my shoulder, her grip just a little too tight, her nails digging in slightly. "I'm always here for you, Ellie," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of the Chardonnay she'd sipped in the car on the way over. Later that night, my mother called, her voice oozing with a practiced, weary sympathy. "Oh, honey, you mustn't mind Chloe," she said, falling into her lifelong role as Chloe's chief apologist. "You know how dramatic she can be. She's just overwhelmed with grief, she processes things differently." But as I hung up the phone, staring out at the dark, empty ranch, I knew what I had seen in Chloe's eyes that day. It wasn't grief. It was calculation. It was the sharp, hungry look of a vulture circling, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to descend and strip the bones clean. And a sickening dread coiled in my stomach. This was only the beginning. 1 week after we laid Mark to rest in the rich Texas soil, I found myself driving my car down a street I rarely visited, toward a destination I wanted to be at less than anywhere else on earth. I was on my way to my nephew Noah's first birthday party. Every cell in my body screamed in protest. The very idea of celebration felt like a sacrilege. My grief was a raw, open wound, and forcing myself into a room full of cheerful noise and happy people felt like pouring salt directly into it. But my mother had been relentless on the phone. "You have to go, Ellie. You must. Family is everything, especially now." What would Mark want? The manipulation was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Of course, Mark would want me to go. He valued family above all else, even when that family was difficult. So I went. I parked my car behind a line of beat-up sedans and took several deep, shuddering breaths, clutching a brightly wrapped gift for a 1-year-old I adored, a child who was the only good thing to come from my sister's chaotic life. The smile I plastered on my face felt like a cheap, cracking mask. It didn't reach my eyes. I doubted anything ever would again. The party was exactly the chaotic, slightly depressing scene I'd pictured. Chloe's rented apartment was small and stuffy. Blue balloons, already losing their helium, drooped from the popcorn ceiling like sad, forgotten fruit. A banner reading "Happy First Birthday Noah" was strung crookedly across the wall. A small group of Chloe's friends, people I vaguely recognized but didn't really know, stood awkwardly in the corner, sipping cheap beer from red plastic cups. My parents were there, perched on the edge of a worn-out sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable and relieved to see me, as if my presence somehow legitimized the event. I navigated the room like a ghost, accepting clumsy condolences that felt like sandpaper on my raw nerves. I endured questions like, "How are you holding up?" with a non-committal shrug. How was I holding up? I was a walking void, a black hole of grief, but that's not something you can say over the sound of shrieking children. After about 30 agonizing minutes of this, just as I was mentally planning my escape, Chloe clinked a spoon against a plastic cup, the sound sharp and jarring. The room fell quiet. She stood in the center of the room, holding Noah on her hip. She was glowing, wearing a brand-new, tight-fitting dress. She looked energized, almost giddy, soaking up the attention with a thirst I knew all too well. "Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my sweet boy," she began, her voice ringing with a false, saccharine cheer. "This has been a year of incredible surprises. And I have one more very important secret that I've been holding on to, for Noah's sake." A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach. The way she was looking at me, her eyes glinting with a strange, triumphant light across the small, crowded living room, this was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. This was the strike. "I know this is going to be a shock to some of you," she continued, her voice dropping for maximum dramatic effect. "But it's time for the truth to come out. Noah is not his father's son." She paused, letting the collective gasp ripple through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Then, Chloe's eyes found mine and locked on. "He's Mark's son." The world didn't just stop. It shattered into a million silent, glittering pieces. The music, the chatter, the very air in my lungs seemed to freeze. I could feel my father stiffen beside me, could hear my mother's strangled sob, but it was all just background noise to the roaring in my own ears. My husband? My faithful, loving, gentle Mark? The lie was so audacious, so grotesque and monstrous, that a strange, hysterical bubble of laughter started to rise in my throat. But Chloe, my sister the performer, wasn't finished. She reached into her designer handbag, a bag I knew for a fact she couldn't afford, and pulled out a folded document. "Mark knew," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "He always planned to do right by his son. And before he died, he made sure of it. He updated his will." She held up the paper like a trophy won in battle. This document states that as his biological child, Noah is entitled to half of his inheritance. That means half of the $950,000 ranch. Every eye in that room, every single one, swiveled to me. They were a sea of pity, morbid curiosity, and second-hand horror. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to collapse into a heap on the sticky floor. Instead, I met my sister's smug, victorious gaze. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my lukewarm water. And to her utter, complete shock, a small, knowing smile curved my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees the board 20 moves ahead. "Oh, I see," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. Without another word, I turned and walked out of that party, leaving a stunned, confused silence in my wake. Chloe thought she had just delivered the checkmate in front of our entire family. She had absolutely no idea that I wasn't a pawn in her game. I was the queen. And I was preparing for a war my brilliant, thoughtful husband had armed me for years ago. To understand that smile, that flash of steel in the face of my sister's monstrous lie, you have to understand my husband, Mark. And to truly understand Mark, you have to understand the bedrock of our life together, our love story. It wasn't a whirlwind fairy tale full of grand, empty gestures. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more real. It was built on kindness, respect, and 1,000 small, unspoken moments of perfect understanding. We met 12 years ago, not in a bar or through friends, but at a charity auction for a local children's hospital. I was a junior interior designer, barely making ends meet, and I had volunteered to help set up the auction items. There was this one piece that took my breath away. It was a huge, abstract oil painting of the Texas Hill Country at sunset, all bold, passionate strokes of fiery orange, deep indigo, and dusty, bruised purple. It was chaotic and beautiful, and it spoke to my soul. I must have returned to stare at it a dozen times throughout the night. Of course, it was projected to sell for thousands of dollars, a sum that might as well have been $1 million to me at the time. Then, at the end of the night, a man I hadn't noticed before, with kind, intelligent eyes and a smile that crinkled at the corners, walked right up to the auctioneer. He didn't grandstand or get into a bidding war. He just waited until the last second and placed a single, decisive bid that silenced the entire room. He won it, just like that. I watched, my heart sinking with a little pang of loss, as he went to claim his prize. I assumed he was some wealthy oil tycoon or tech mogul. But instead of having the painting wrapped up, he walked it straight over to me, navigating the crowded room with a quiet grace. "I saw you looking at this all night," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. "I'm Mark. I think this belongs with you." And he just gave it to me. No strings attached. No expectation. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated kindness. That was Mark. He was a man who noticed things. A man who acted on his decent impulses. I fell for him in that single moment, completely and irrevocably. Our first date was the following evening. It felt less like a first date and more like picking up a conversation we'd been having our entire lives. He was a corporate attorney, brilliant and driven, but utterly without ego. I watched him treat our waitress with the same respect and genuine interest he would later show a senior judge. He remembered her name, asked her about her son, who she'd mentioned in passing was sick with the flu, and he listened, truly listened, to her answer. He had this incredible ability to make everyone around him feel seen and valued. 8 months later, he took me to a secluded bluff overlooking Lake Travis. As the real sunset painted the sky in the same impossible colors as the painting that had brought us together, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. The painting has hung in the main living room of our home ever since, a constant reminder of the generous, observant man I married. Shortly after our first anniversary, we pulled every penny we had and bought the ranch. It was a huge financial stretch, a risk that terrified me. But Mark, ever the optimist, saw nothing but potential. The house itself was an old stone rancher, dated and neglected, but solid as the Texas earth it was built on. The land, 100 acres of rolling hills dotted with majestic live oak trees, was where we planned to build our future. Good bones, Ellie, he'd said, running his hand over a thick, exposed cedar beam. All it needs is your magic. This was where we envisioned our future children running and playing, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air. But those children never came. It wasn't for lack of trying, or loving, or praying. For years, our lives became a clinical, heartbreaking cycle of ovulation charts, temperature readings, and whispered, desperate hopes. Then came the specialists, the endless, invasive tests, the soul-crushing procedures. We endured 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization. Each one was a roller coaster of chemically induced hope and devastating failure. It drained our savings, but more than that, it drained our spirits, leaving us exhausted and raw. I still have a vivid, painful memory of the final, silent drive home from the fertility clinic after the last attempt failed. Mark reached across the center console of his truck and just held my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both knew, in that shared, heavy silence, that this particular road had come to an end. That night, we sat on our wide front porch swing, a place where we'd had so many happy conversations, and watched the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the dusk. I was crying silently, the tears tracking hot paths down my cheeks. Mark pulled me close, wrapping his strong arms around me. "Hey," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at me." He gently tilted my chin up. "We can still have a beautiful, incredible life. You and me. Right here. That's enough. You are enough." And the most incredible thing was, he meant it. He truly, deeply meant it. There was no resentment, no lingering disappointment. Just love. Pure, unconditional love. So we rebuilt our dreams. We pivoted. We poured all our love and energy into each other, into our careers, and into our home. We renovated the ranch room by room, a true labor of love. He was my biggest cheerleader, the one who gave me the courage to leave the big design firm I worked for and launch my own business. Our life was full. It was different from the one we had meticulously planned, but it was happy. It was our sanctuary. It was our fortress. But even the strongest fortress can be threatened by a saboteur from within. A shadow that was always lurking at the edges of our happiness, a shadow named Chloe. My sister, Chloe, is 4 years younger than me, but the chasm between our personalities and life choices always made the gap feel more like a generation. While I was the focused, ambitious one, the planner who thrived on order and hard work, she was the beautiful, incandescently chaotic one. The wild child. Our parents, in their misguided love, spent her entire life not parenting her, but managing her. They were her perpetual safety net, forever swooping in to clean up her messes. This constant rescuing didn't help her, it crippled her. It taught her that actions had no real consequences, that there was always an easy way out, usually funded by someone else. Our relationship, especially as adults, was a one-way street of intense, exhausting competition, all of it flowing from her direction. It was a pattern so predictable it was almost boring. When I made partner at my design firm, she announced a week later that she was thinking of starting her own event planning business, a venture that never materialized beyond a fancy business card. When Mark and I bought our first new car, a reliable Subaru, she spent the next 3 months complaining endlessly about her rattling old Civic, dropping hints so heavy they were anchors, until our parents finally co-signed a lease on a flashy convertible she absolutely could not afford. It was a constant, draining game of one-upmanship that I had no interest in playing. Mark, with his deep well of patience, always encouraged me to be the bigger person. "She's your only sister, Ellie," he would say, trying to smooth my ruffled feathers. "Family is messy. You just have to love them through it." He tried so hard to see the good in her, to believe that beneath the layers of drama and insecurity, there was a person worth connecting with. That belief was shattered about 3 years ago. The incident that finally opened his eyes, the one that drew a permanent line in the sand, happened on a warm summer evening. We'd invited Chloe over for a celebratory dinner. She'd managed to hold down a new job for a full 3 months, and we wanted to encourage her. Mark, who loved to barbecue, had spent all afternoon smoking a brisket. We opened a good bottle of Cabernet. It was a pleasant, normal evening until I had to step away to take an emergency work call. A frantic client was having a full-blown crisis over the shade of grout for their new bathroom. The call took longer than I expected, nearly 20 minutes of me talking a grown man off a ledge over the difference between alabaster and eggshell. When I finally got off the phone and walked back to the dining room, the entire atmosphere had shifted. The air was thick with a strange tension. Chloe had moved her chair much closer to Mark's, so their knees were almost touching. Her hand was resting familiarly on his forearm, and she was laughing, a throaty, suggestive laugh that I'd never heard her use before. Mark looked profoundly uncomfortable, his smile tight and strained. I brushed it off at the time. She'd had a couple of glasses of wine, she was always overly affectionate, a touchy-feely person. I made an excuse for her. But later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, the truth came out. Mark, who was incapable of dishonesty, sat on the edge of our mattress, his brow furrowed with a troubled expression. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, his voice serious. "And I really don't want it to cause a massive problem between you and your sister, but I will never, ever keep a secret from you. Not about something like this." He then explained what had happened while I was on the phone. Chloe, emboldened by the wine, had launched into a series of increasingly inappropriate comments. She told him how lucky I was to have a man like him, then followed it up with, "A man with your drive and ambition deserves someone who can truly appreciate him, someone who isn't always so focused on work." She had leaned in close and suggested that if he was ever feeling bored or neglected, he knew who to call. When he had immediately and firmly shut her down, telling her she was being completely inappropriate and disrespectful to me and to our marriage, she had simply laughed it off with a flirty toss of her hair. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Mark. Can't you take a joke?" "I was just kidding," she'd said. I was deeply hurt, but more than that, I was weary. It wasn't a surprise. It was just Chloe. It was classic Chloe, pushing boundaries, testing for weaknesses, creating drama where there was none. We made the joint decision to let it go, hoping against hope that it was an isolated incident fueled by alcohol and her usual toxic brew of jealousy. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a campaign. Over the next few months, it escalated. A lingering touch on his arm when she thought I wasn't looking. A series of late-night text messages sent directly to him, full of accidental innuendos. The final straw for Mark was when she showed up at his downtown law firm unannounced, dressed in a tight dress, bypassing the receptionist and walking straight into his office, asking him to take her to lunch. Each time, Mark told me immediately. He was a fortress of integrity. He set firm, clear boundaries with her, but she treated them like a game, something to be cleverly circumvented. The incident at his office was our breaking point. We knew we had to involve our parents. That conversation was a disaster of epic proportions. They didn't just fail to support us, they actively took her side. My father, ever the conflict avoider, suggested Mark was a successful man and was probably just misinterpreting some innocent, friendly gestures. But it was my mother's reaction that felt like a knife in the back. With a look of misguided wisdom, she actually suggested that maybe Mark was feeling flattered by the attention from a beautiful young woman and was exaggerating the situation to make himself seem more desirable. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of that statement, the casual dismissal of my husband's integrity and my own feelings, was a betrayal so deep it left me speechless. That night, sitting on our porch, the conversation with my parents echoing in our ears, Mark and I made a solemn pact. We were a team. We would protect our marriage and our peace, even if it meant distancing ourselves from the people who were supposed to be our staunchest allies. The lack of their support was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also the clarifying moment when Mark realized we had to protect ourselves in a much more official capacity. He saw darkness and a determination in her that I, her own sister, had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. And he decided, right then and there, that he would build a firewall to protect me from it. Life settled into a new, quieter, and frankly more peaceful rhythm after we made the difficult decision to distance ourselves from Chloe. We stopped extending invitations that we knew would be fraught with tension, and we politely declined group events where we knew she would be. It created a noticeable chill in our extended family, and my parents made their disapproval known through passive-aggressive comments and guilt-tripping phone calls. But the sense of relief and security within the walls of our own home was worth the external friction. Our ranch became our sanctuary again, a haven free from her toxic, chaotic energy. Then, about 2.5 years ago, a new storm appeared on the horizon. This one wasn't manufactured drama, it was a genuine medical crisis. For weeks, Mark had been dealing with a persistent, nagging pain. Being a typically stubborn man, he tried to ignore it, brushing it off as a pulled muscle or stress. But the pain grew worse, and after a particularly bad weekend, I finally convinced him to see a specialist. He went to a top urologist in Austin, and after a series of scans and tests, the diagnosis came back: a varicocele. It was a complex and painful enlargement of the veins within the scrotum. The doctor assured us it wasn't life-threatening, but it was a chronic condition that was causing significant discomfort and would require surgery to correct. The day of the surgery, I sat in the cold, sterile waiting room of the hospital for what felt like an eternity, flipping through old magazines without seeing the pages. Finally, the surgeon came out to speak with me. The procedure itself, he explained, had gone well. However, during the operation, they discovered that the issue was far more complex and extensive than the initial scans had indicated. There was a complication, a web of veins so tangled that it posed a significant risk for recurrence and other, more serious future health problems. After Mark was settled in the recovery room, groggy but lucid, the surgeon sat down with both of us. His face was grave. He explained the situation in detail, the long-term risks, the potential for chronic pain. And then he made a recommendation that felt like a physical blow. Given the extensive nature of the problem, he strongly advised that Mark undergo a vasectomy. He explained that any future inflammation or recurrence in that highly sensitive area could lead to severe complications, and that eliminating the possibility of the reproductive system's normal function was the safest medical course of action for his long-term health. I remember staring at the doctor, the clinical, detached word hanging in the air between us. A vasectomy. After all our years of desperate hope, after all the tears and the heartbreak and the quiet surrender, this felt like the universe's final, cruel joke. It was the definitive, irreversible end to a dream we had already mourned. The choice was brutal in its simplicity: Mark's future health versus the ghost of a dream that was, in all honesty, already gone. We didn't have to discuss it for long. We looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between us in a single, shared glance. Mark's health was the only thing in the world that mattered. With hearts so heavy they felt like stones in our chests, we gave our consent. The vasectomy was performed then and there. It was 100% successful. Follow-up tests in the subsequent weeks confirmed it with scientific certainty. Mark's sperm count was 0. It was physically, biologically, scientifically impossible for him to ever father a child again. We never told a single soul. Not my parents, not his, not our closest friends. After years of enduring invasive questions and pitying looks about our childless status, we had learned to guard our privacy with the ferocity of watchdogs. This new, painful piece of our story was ours and ours alone. A week later, as Mark was recovering at home on the ranch, sitting on our porch swing with a discreetly positioned ice pack and a stoic expression, he said something that seemed strangely paranoid at the time. He was looking out over the fields, where the bluebonnets were just beginning to bloom, painting the landscape in shades of purple and blue. "You know," he said quietly, his voice still a little raspy from the anesthesia. "Chloe's not done." I had laughed, trying to lighten the heavy mood that had settled over us since the surgery. "What on earth are you talking about? She hasn't called in months." "I'm serious, Ellie," he said, turning to look at me, his eyes clearer and more focused than I'd ever seen them. "She's not the type to just give up and walk away. Her attempts to get between us failed. I have a feeling that one day, she'll find another way to attack our life. She'll try something more drastic. Something twisted. He was so deeply serious it unnerved me. He saw darkness in her, a capacity for vindictiveness that I, her own sister, had spent a lifetime trying to excuse or explain away. I had brushed off his premonition then as him being overly cautious. But he hadn't. The very next week, still sore and moving stiffly, he picked up the phone and scheduled an appointment with our longtime family attorney, Arthur Vance. That single decision, born from his incredible foresight and his fierce, unwavering desire to protect me from a threat I couldn't yet see, would ultimately be the shield that saved me from the ruins of my sister's malicious lies. The morning after Noah's disastrous first birthday party, I didn't waste time with tears or rage. The time for that would come later. That morning was for action. I got dressed with a grim sense of purpose, put on a pot of coffee so strong it could dissolve a spoon, and drove my truck to the downtown Austin branch of our bank. The building was a modern skyscraper of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the old, stone ranch house I called home. Mr. Henderson, the kind, silver-haired branch manager who had handled our mortgage years ago, greeted me at the door with sad eyes and the usual quiet condolences. He personally escorted me down to the vault, a courtesy I appreciated. Alone in the small, sterile, and silent viewing room, I slid my key into the lock of safe deposit box 347. My hand was surprisingly steady. I remembered the day we'd rented it, right after the final, awful conversation with my parents about Chloe. Mark had taken both my hands in his and said, "We're a team, Ellie. We protect our team." Then he'd grinned to lighten the mood. Think of this as our disaster preparation kit. For hurricanes, tornadoes, or family drama. I'd rolled my eyes at him then. Now, as I lifted the heavy metal lid, I sent a silent thank you to my brilliant husband. It was all there. Meticulously organized. Just as he'd planned. On the very top was his legitimate, last will and testament. I unfolded the thick, high-quality paper. It was prepared by Arthur Vance's prestigious law firm, signed by Mark in his confident, familiar script, and properly notarized and witnessed by two other partners at the firm. The language was simple, direct, and ironclad. In the event of his death, everything he owned, his half of our beloved ranch, his 401k, his investment portfolio, his personal effects, passed to me, his wife, Eleanor Vance Preston. No one else was mentioned. Not Chloe. Not Noah. No one. Beneath the will was a thick, sealed manila envelope marked medical, confidential. I opened it. Inside were the complete, certified records from his urologist. The initial diagnosis. The detailed surgical report. And most importantly, the clear, unambiguous confirmation of a successful vasectomy, dated 2.5 years ago. Stapled to it were the lab results from the follow-up analysis, a clinical document that stated, in no uncertain terms, a 0 sperm count. It was irrefutable. It was scientific. It was the simple, biological truth. Then, my breath caught in my throat. Beneath the medical file was a simple, leather-bound moleskine notebook. A journal. I opened it. In Mark's familiar, neat, lawyerly handwriting, he had documented everything. Every single inappropriate interaction with Chloe, starting from the dinner party 3 years ago. He had listed dates, times, and exact quotes she had said. He described the text messages she'd sent, the uninvited visit to his office, his conversations with her, and our subsequent, disastrous conversation with my parents. He had created a meticulous, damning timeline of her harassment and our attempts to deal with it. It was his word against hers, but it was documented with the precision and clarity that had made him such a formidable attorney. Next to the journal were the physical printouts of the text messages themselves, the ones that had prompted him to block her number. And tucked behind those was a signed, dated letter from Arthur Vance, confirming that his firm held a copy of Mark's true will and that he was fully aware of the circumstances surrounding its creation, including Mark's specific concerns about potential future fraudulent claims from my sister. He was a corroborating witness. At the very bottom of the box, lying on the cool metal, was a single, sealed envelope of heavy cream-colored paper. My name was written on it in his hand. My heart hammered against my ribs as I carefully tore it open. "My dearest Ellie," the letter began. His handwriting was a comfort, a voice from the past. "If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened, and you've had to open our little box of tricks. I pray it's 50 years from now, and we are old and gray, and all of Chloe's drama is just a funny, distant story we tell our grandkids, though I guess they won't be our grandkids, will they? Sorry, bad joke." I couldn't resist. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred my vision. Even from beyond the grave, he was trying to make me smile. He knew me so well. "But if the worst has happened sooner, and she has tried to use my absence to hurt you, as I always feared she might, please use these documents. Do not hesitate. Do not let your good and beautiful heart, your unwavering loyalty to family, be your downfall. You deserve to be protected. You deserve peace. Know that I love you more than all the stars in the Texas sky. Know that I tried to protect you even in this. Always and forever. Yours, Mark." I sat there in that cold, quiet, air-conditioned room, the letter clutched in my hand, and I felt his love wrap around me like a suit of armor. My practical, brilliant, loving husband had seen this coming. He had prepared for this very battle. I carefully wiped my tears, my grief momentarily replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I made copies of everything I needed right there at the bank. My grief was still a raw, gaping wound, but now, it was reinforced with high-grade steel. I stepped out into the bright Austin sun, pulled out my phone, and called Arthur Vance. The war had officially begun. While Arthur and his team began the methodical work of preparing our counteroffensive, I tried to find refuge in my routine. I threw myself into my design business, the company Mark had so proudly encouraged me to start. It was my sanctuary, a world of color, texture, and order that I could control in a life that had spun violently out of control. But Chloe, high on her perceived victory, wasn't going to allow me even a moment of peace. A few days after I'd hired Arthur, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line, in all caps, read, "Urgent legal notice regarding the estate of Mark Preston." My heart did a nervous little flutter as I clicked it open. The email was a disaster. It was a rambling, poorly formatted document that looked like it had been copied and pasted from some shady free legal advice website from 1998. It was riddled with spelling errors, she'd spelled testament as testament, and nonsensical legal jargon that she clearly didn't understand. It was an amateurish attempt at intimidation, demanding that I contact her within 30 days to commence the transfer of real estate assets as stipulated in the legally binding last will and testament of the deceased. It was so laughable it would have been funny, if the intent behind it wasn't so venomous. I forwarded it straight to Arthur with the simple note, FYI. The real, far more damaging attack came 2 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in my studio, a bright, airy space in a trendy converted warehouse district in East Austin. I was in the middle of a crucial meeting, presenting my final design proposal to a major new client. Mrs. Henrietta Miller was a force of nature, an elegant widow in her late 60s who had recently moved to Texas from New York after selling her husband's finance company for an astronomical sum. This project, a full gut and redesign of her sprawling West Lake Hills mansion, was the biggest contract my small firm had ever landed. It was a game changer. We were looking over swatches of hand-printed silk wallpaper when the bell on my studio door chimed, not with its usual pleasant tinkle, but with an aggressive, jarring clang. In stormed Chloe. She was dressed for a fight, wearing a tight red dress and teetering on heels that were too high, her face a mask of righteous fury. "Eleanor," she shouted, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged space, making both me and the formidable Mrs. Miller jump. "I emailed you. I sent you a legal notice. You're ignoring me. Do you really think you can just steal what rightfully belongs to my son?" I rose slowly from my chair, my face flushing with a potent cocktail of white-hot rage and deep, profound humiliation. "Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is a private meeting. This is not the time or the place. You need to leave. Now. Oh, I'm not going anywhere, she spat, planting her hands on her hips, her eyes wild with a feverish intensity. She then had the audacity to turn her attention to my client. And you, she said, pointing a finger at Mrs. Miller. You should know exactly who you're doing business with. This woman, my own flesh and blood sister, is trying to defraud a grieving single mother and her poor, fatherless child. She's a greedy, heartless, scheming witch who is trying to keep every last penny of my son's rightful inheritance for herself. I was rendered speechless. The sheer, unmitigated gall. To air our family's toxic, private drama in front of a client, to try to actively destroy my reputation and my livelihood, it was a new, despicable low, even for her. But Mrs. Henrietta Miller was not a woman who was easily rattled. She had clearly dealt with bigger sharks than my sister in her lifetime. She set down her porcelain teacup on its saucer with a calm, deliberate, and very loud click. She looked Chloe up and down, a slow, dismissive appraisal from head to toe, her expression one of utter disdain. "Young lady," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable authority of old money and a lifetime of command. "I believe this is a private business meeting. Whatever unfortunate personal issues you seem to be having, you will take them elsewhere. Now." Chloe, for the first time in her life perhaps, seemed taken aback by a woman she couldn't intimidate or charm. She stammered, "But, you don't understand, he was my son's father." "I understand perfectly," Mrs. Miller cut her off, her voice as sharp and cold as ice. "I understand that you have just made a complete and utter fool of yourself and that you are trespassing in a place of business. You will leave now. Or I will have my driver, a very large man named Sergei who used to be in the Russian Special Forces and now serves as my head of security, remove you. Do I make myself clear?" Defeated and humiliated, Chloe shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred and stormed out, slamming the glass door so hard I was surprised it didn't shatter. The silence she left behind was deafening. My face was burning. I turned to Mrs. Miller, my mind racing, ready to apologize profusely, certain I had just lost the biggest contract of my career. But she just looked at me, her sharp, intelligent eyes softening with something that looked like genuine empathy. "Eleanor," she said, and then she reached out and picked up a silk swatch we had been admiring. "Don't you worry about that little piece of trash. In my experience, kites rise highest against the wind, not with it. Now, about this drapery for the master bedroom. I was thinking we should go with the bolder pattern. It's more you. Don't you agree?" Her unexpected, unwavering kindness was a lifeline in that moment of profound mortification. But Chloe's attack had done something else. It had solidified the ice in my veins. Any lingering shred of sisterly obligation, any whisper of a shared childhood, had just been incinerated in the fire of her malice. This was no longer just about a house or money. She had come for my life's work. She had tried to ruin me. And I was going to make absolutely certain that she failed. Miserably. Arthur Vance, my attorney, was a man who appreciated thoroughness. He was old school, a legal traditionalist who believed in building a case brick by brick until it was an unassailable fortress. When I told him about Chloe's stunt at my studio, he steepled his fingers, his expression grim. "A forged will is a serious, imprisonable crime, Eleanor," he said, his voice a calm, steady baritone that was immensely reassuring. He peered at me over the top of his half-moon reading glasses. But a false claim of paternity, especially when a child is involved, can get emotionally messy and play on a jury's sympathy, no matter how baseless. We need more than just the vasectomy record, as ironclad as it is. We need to dismantle her entire narrative. We need to understand why she's doing this. Desperate people do desperate things, and jurors need to understand that desperation. That's when he recommended Rick Schmidt, the private investigator. Rick was a former Austin PD detective with 20 years on the force, a stocky, no-nonsense guy with a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. He didn't look like the investigators in the movies, he looked like a suburban dad who happened to be incredibly good at finding out things people didn't want found. I sat in Arthur's polished downtown office, with its panoramic view of the Texas state capitol, and laid out the entire sordid story for him. I told him everything, from Chloe's lifelong pattern of jealousy to the bombshell at the birthday party and the recent ambush at my studio. Rick listened intently, his pen scratching away in a small notebook, asking few but pointed questions. "Do you have the name of the child's presumed father?" he asked. I gave him Kyle's name and the little information I had. "Okay," he said when I finished. "I'll need a few days. I'll start with her financials, her living situation, and her relationship history with this Kyle character. Before I tell you what Rick discovered, and believe me when I say, it's even worse and more pathetic than you can possibly imagine, I just want to ask, if you're finding this story of betrayal and the fight for justice compelling, please take a second to hit that like button. It tells the YouTube algorithm that you're engaged and it really helps the channel grow so I can keep sharing these important stories." Okay, so, 3 days later, Rick called Arthur's office and requested an immediate meeting. When I arrived, Arthur and Rick were sitting at a massive conference table, a spread of documents laid out between them. Rick got straight to the point. "Your sister is drowning," he said bluntly, his voice devoid of emotion. "And she's trying to pull you under with her." He wasn't exaggerating. He walked us through his findings. Chloe had accumulated over $90,000 in consolidated debt. He had pulled her credit reports. There were 6 maxed-out credit cards, 3 high-interest personal loans from sketchy online lenders, and a mountain of unpaid medical bills. It turned out that Noah, my sweet, innocent nephew, had been born with a minor but persistent heart condition that required surgery shortly after birth and ongoing, expensive specialist care. This was a fact Chloe had never bothered to share with our family, likely because admitting it would have required admitting she was in over her head and needed help. "Her credit score is in the tank," Rick continued, sliding a formal-looking document across the polished wood table. "And this is a legal eviction notice, filed with the county court. Her landlord filed it last week. She's 4 months behind on rent. She and the boy will be out on the street by the end of the month if she can't come up with $5,000. The motivation behind her monstrous lie was suddenly crystal clear. This wasn't just opportunistic greed, it was the frantic, panicked flailing of a person about to go under for the 3rd time. As for Kyle, the presumed father, he had completely ghosted her. Rick's contacts had tracked him to a bartending job at a tiki bar in Sarasota, Florida. He'd left Austin shortly after Noah was born, was paying $0 in child support, and according to his very public social media profiles, was living his best life with a new, 22-year-old girlfriend. Then Rick delivered the kill shot. The piece of evidence that transformed this from a tragic story of desperation into a clear-cut case of malicious, premeditated fraud. "It took some doing," Rick said, his voice grim, "but I was able to find a former friend of hers, a woman named Jenna who was at the birthday party. She was nervous, but she was willing to cooperate once she understood the gravity of the situation. This," he said, pushing a stack of papers toward me, "is a printout of a text exchange between your sister and Jenna, from the week after Mark passed away." I took the papers, my hands shaking. The words on the page made me feel physically ill. "Chloe, Mark's death is a tragedy, of course, but honestly, it might be my only way out of this mess. That ranch is worth almost $1 million now. This is my one chance to fix my life. Jenna, Chloe, are you serious? You can't do that. A fake will? That's crazy. Chloe, don't be so dramatic. My friend Dave is a wizard with Photoshop. He found a sample of Mark's signature online from some old charity auction program. It'll look totally legit. Ellie's always been the golden child, everything handed to her. It's time for me to get my share of the good life. She had 11 wonderful years with a great guy. The least she can do is share the wealth now that he's gone." The cold, calculated, remorseless nature of it stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a cold-blooded, premeditated plan to exploit my deepest grief for her own financial gain. "There's one last thing," Rick said gently, seeing the look on my face. I ran a deeper background check on Chloe, just to be thorough. It seems this isn't the first time she's tried a stunt like this. A few years ago, she accused a wealthy former boyfriend of being the father of a miscarriage she claimed to have had. She tried to blackmail him for a $50,000 settlement. He was a lawyer himself, and he threatened to call the police and have her charged with extortion. She backed off immediately. I just sat there, in stunned silence, in that beautiful, expensive law office. This wasn't my sister. I didn't know who this person was. This was a predator. A habitual con artist who wore my sister's face. And she had my innocent nephew, a little boy with a heart condition, caught in the middle of her destructive, chaotic life. Arthur looked at me, his expression firm and resolved. "Well, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I believe we now have everything we need to put an end to this. Permanently." My hands were surprisingly steady as I arranged the items on the solid oak coffee table in my living room. The large, vibrant painting Mark had bought for me, the one of the hill country sunset, hung on the wall behind me like a silent, watchful guardian. I had invited Chloe to the ranch under the pretense of discussing the terms of the will amicably. On the phone, her voice had been dripping with a smug, syrupy satisfaction. She believed my invitation was a white flag, a sign of her impending victory. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. When the doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m., I took a single, deep, calming breath. I looked at my reflection in the hall mirror. I was not the grieving, shattered widow she had last seen. The pain was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but today it was overlaid with a cold, hard resolve. Today, I was a woman on a mission. I led her into the living room, a space filled with memories of love and laughter, a space she was trying to tear apart. I had arranged 2 plush armchairs to face each other, creating an intimate but confrontational setting. Between them, on the coffee table, sat 2 tall glasses of iced water, a thick manila folder, and a small, discreet digital audio recorder. "Chloe, please, have a seat," I said, my voice perfectly even and calm. "I hope you don't mind if I record our conversation. Given the legal nature of what you've proposed, I think it's prudent that we both have a clear and accurate record of whatever agreement we come to." She hesitated for just a split second, a flicker of surprise, a micro-expression of unease crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a confident smirk. "Sure, Ellie. Whatever makes you comfortable," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, sinking into the armchair as if she owned the place. "Though I think this is all pretty straightforward. The will is the will, after all." I reached forward and pressed the record button. In a clear, formal tone, I stated the date, the time, our full names, and our location. "Chloe," I said, looking directly at her, "do you consent to this conversation being recorded?" "Yes, fine, whatever," she said impatiently. I sat back, steepling my fingers, and looked at her. I really looked at her, searching for any sign of the little sister I had once known. I found none. "Before we discuss this document you've presented," I began, my voice quiet and measured, "I need to understand. I need you to tell me, for the record, exactly what you are claiming happened between you and my husband, Mark." She launched into her story. It was a masterpiece of fiction, clearly rehearsed and polished to a high sheen. She wove a tale of a secret, passionate affair that had supposedly begun 2 years ago, during a time she claimed our marriage was on the rocks. She described clandestine meetings at the historic Driscoll Hotel downtown, on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when he was supposedly working late on a big case. She claimed he was deeply unhappy, that our long and painful struggles with infertility had driven an irreparable wedge between us, and that he had found solace, comfort, and a fiery passion in her arms that he no longer had with me. She painted a vivid picture of a tragic, secret love, 2 souls connecting against all odds. She claimed Noah was conceived during one of their passionate, secret encounters. "He always meant to tell you, Ellie," she finished, her eyes wide and glistening with practiced, unshed tears. He loved you, in his own way, but he was a good man, trapped in a loveless marriage. He promised me he would always provide for his son. He was a man of honor. I listened patiently, without a single interruption, letting her spin her intricate web of lies. I let her commit every detail of her fiction to the official record. I let her dig her own grave, shovelful by shovelful. When she finally finished, a self-satisfied, sorrowful look plastered on her face, I leaned forward slightly. "The Driscoll, you said?" I asked, my tone casual, conversational. "Yes," she replied quickly, confidently. "It was our special place." "And what floor was your room on? Do you remember the room number?" She faltered for the first time. "Oh, it was on a high floor. It had a wonderful view of the city. I don't recall the exact number. The details are a blur, you know, it was all so emotional." "Of course," I said. "And what did Mark typically order from room service?" He was such a creature of habit. A steak?" "I think," she guessed, her confidence clearly wavering. "A ribeye. Medium rare." Mark hated steak. I continued with a relentless barrage of increasingly specific, intimate questions. What side of the bed did he sleep on? Did he shower in the morning or at night? What brand of toothpaste did he use? What was the name of his childhood dog, the one his mother gave him for his 10th birthday? What was his biggest, most irrational fear? Spiders. Details that anyone who had truly been intimate with my husband for over a decade, who had listened to his stories, his dreams, and his silly fears, would know instantly. Her answers became vague, then contradictory. She grew flustered, her face beginning to flush a blotchy red. "Why does any of this matter?" she finally snapped, her composure cracking completely. "This is ridiculous. The point is that Noah is Mark's son, and I have the will to prove that Mark wanted to provide for him." I held her hostile gaze. I let the silence in the room stretch for a long, uncomfortable 10 seconds. Then, I slowly, deliberately, reached for the thick manila folder on the table. "Actually," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, quiet, and utterly terrifying tone. "That's where you're wrong. Both of those claims are demonstrably, provably, and laughably false." And I opened the folder. The first document I removed from the folder was the medical record. I didn't say a word. I simply slid the crisp, official-looking papers across the polished oak coffee table. They came to a stop directly in front of her. "Read it," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her eyes darted down. I watched her scan the clinical language, the letterhead from Austin Regional Clinic, the signature of a respected urologist. I watched as her eyes found the key phrases: bilateral varicocelectomy, surgical complications. And then, the two words that detonated her entire fantasy: vasectomy performed. I watched the exact moment the meaning registered. Her face, already flushed, drained of all color, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. It was as if I had physically struck her, knocking the air from her lungs. Her trembling hand reached out and picked up the papers. She stared at the date on the report, 2.5 years ago, a full year before Noah was even conceived. She stared at the attached lab results with their cold, hard, scientific conclusion: 0 sperm count. This could be fake," she whispered, but the words were hollow, weightless. Her voice had no conviction. "It's not," I said calmly, my voice like ice. "They are certified copies from the hospital's records department. And Dr. Miller, the surgeon, is prepared to testify to their authenticity in a court of law. It was physically, biologically impossible for my husband to father your child, Chloe. But that," I said, reaching back into the folder, "is just the beginning." Next, I slid his actual will across the table. "This is Mark's legitimate last will and testament, prepared by our attorney, Arthur Vance, witnessed by 2 other partners at his firm, and properly filed with the Travis County Court. As you can see, I am his wife and his sole beneficiary. There is no mention of you. There is no mention of Noah. Her confidence was visibly crumbling, but she made one last, pathetic, desperate attempt to rally. He must have changed it. After this one was drawn up. The one I have is more recent. The document you have, I said, my voice sharp and cutting, is a forgery. A rather amateurish one, I might add. My attorney has already identified multiple, fundamental legal inconsistencies in the language you used. And the signature, while a decent Photoshop job from a low-resolution image you probably found online, would not fool a certified forensic analyst for a single second. Creating and presenting a fraudulent will is a felony in the state of Texas, Chloe. It's called fraud by deception, and it carries a sentence of 2 to 10 years in a state prison. I didn't stop. I was relentless. I laid out the rest of the evidence, one damning piece at a time, like a prosecutor presenting her final case to a jury. Mark's leather-bound journal, open to the page detailing her unwanted advances at his office. The printouts of her venomous text messages to her friend Jenna, planning the entire, cold-blooded scheme. And finally, the private investigator's multi-page report detailing her $90,000 debt, her impending eviction, and her history of attempting to blackmail a former boyfriend. I laid it all out between us. The ugly, undeniable, documented truth of who she was. We know everything, Chloe, I finished softly, the quietness of my voice more damning than any shout. We know about the debt. We know about the lies. We know about Dave, your Photoshop friend. We know everything. The question now is, what happens next? For a long, agonizing moment, she just sat there, completely still, staring at the mountain of evidence that had systematically destroyed her world of lies. And then, something inside her broke. It wasn't the theatrical, manipulative tears I was so used to seeing. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. It was a deep, ugly, body-racking sob that came from a place of utter ruin and desolation. I didn't know what else to do, she gasped, the words choked and raw, barely intelligible through her sobs. I'm going to be homeless. Tyler left us with nothing. The medical bills for Noah, they just keep coming and coming. I thought if I could just get some money from the ranch, I could fix everything. So you decided to destroy my husband's reputation? I asked, my voice hard as stone. You decided to tell the world he was a cheater? You decided to forge legal documents? You decided to trample all over my grief for your own selfish gain? You have everything, she suddenly screamed, her sadness twisting into the familiar, venomous poison of her lifelong jealousy. This big, beautiful house. A successful business. Everyone's respect and admiration. What do I have? A baby with a heart defect, a mountain of debt, and an eviction notice. You try making good decisions when you're in that situation. Her raw, pathetic outburst hung in the air between us. For the first time, I was hearing the unvarnished, ugly truth, stripped of all its manipulative layers. I didn't feel a shred of forgiveness. Not even close. But for the first time, I felt a sliver of bleak, pathetic understanding. The understanding of how a desperate, cornered, and morally bankrupt animal behaves. I let her cry for another minute, the sound echoing in the quiet, sunlit room. Then I leaned forward, making sure she met my eyes. I could press charges, I said quietly. I have more than enough evidence in this folder to see you put in jail for a very long time. What you did was not just cruel, it was a felony. She nodded miserably, her fight completely gone, not even trying to deny it. But that, I continued, would hurt Noah. And despite everything you have done, he is my nephew. And I love him. So here, I said, my voice clear and strong, is what is going to happen now. I let Chloe sit in her misery for a long moment before I laid out her future. You have two options, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. Option A, I walk out of this room, I call Arthur Vance, and I instruct him to hand this entire folder over to the Travis County District Attorney's office. He seems to think they'd be very interested in a case of felony fraud and forgery. You would be arrested. You would be charged. And I would pursue it to the fullest extent of the law. I will not rest until you are convicted." Her head was bowed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked small and pathetic. "Or," I continued, "there is option B. You agree to my terms. Every single one of them. Without negotiation." I leaned forward, making sure I had her complete, terrified attention. "First, you are going to write a letter of confession and a full apology. A public one. You will detail your lies, you will affirm that Mark was a faithful and loving husband, that you forged his will, and that you did it all out of financial desperation. You will then send a copy of that letter to every single person who attended Noah's birthday party and every single person who was at Mark's funeral. You will repair the damage you did to his reputation." "And then what?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Even if I do that, Noah and I will still be evicted." "Then," I said, "in exchange for that public confession and a legally binding agreement, which will be drafted by Arthur and notarized, stating that you will never attempt anything like this again, I will help you. But let me be perfectly, crystal clear." I jabbed a finger toward her for emphasis. "I am not doing this for you. I am doing this for Noah. He is an innocent child who deserves a stable home. I will set up a trust fund, which will be managed by a third-party financial trustee, not by you. That fund will be used exclusively for Noah's documented medical and educational needs. I will also pay your back rent to avoid the eviction and provide you with a modest stipend for 6 months to help you find stable, affordable housing. But that support is conditional." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a disbelieving, desperate hope. "Conditions?" "Yes. Condition 1, you will enroll in and attend weekly therapy sessions with a licensed psychologist for a minimum of 1 year. Condition 2, you will attend financial counseling to learn how to manage your money. Condition 3, you will find and maintain steady, legal employment. And Condition 4, you will allow me to be a regular, active part of Noah's life, to ensure that he is being properly cared for. If you violate a single one of these terms, if you miss a therapy session, if you quit your job without another one lined up, the financial support stops. Immediately and permanently. Do you understand me?" She sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her choices, her ruin, and my unexpected offer finally settling on her. At last, she gave a small, defeated nod. The following Saturday, I arranged a dinner at the ranch. The guest list was small and exclusive, just me, Chloe, and our parents. As I had predicted, my mother arrived armed with a casserole and a defensive attitude. "Ellie, I do hope you're not going to be too hard on your sister," she began as she placed the dish on my counter. "She's been through so much." "Just sit down, Mom," I said, my patience worn down to a single, frayed thread. Once we were all seated at the large dining table, a place of so many happy family meals, I asked Chloe to tell them what she had done. In a small, halting, and ashamed voice, she confessed everything. The lies about Mark. The forged will. The crushing debt. My father was visibly appalled, his face pale with shock and disappointment. "Chloe, how could you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. But my mother's immediate reaction was not for me, her grieving daughter who had just been the victim of a cruel plot. It was for the perpetrator. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Well, you wouldn't really send your own sister to jail, would you, Ellie? For a mistake? She has a baby to think about." That was it. The final, clarifying straw. A lifetime of frustration and feeling secondary erupted from me. "I am family too, Mom." My voice was sharp and clear, cutting through the thick tension in the room. "I am your daughter too. The one who just lost her husband of 11 years. The one who had to listen to her own sister tell the world he was an adulterer. Where was your concern for me in all of this? Where was your protection?" The table fell into a stunned silence. My father looked deeply ashamed. My mother looked as though I'd slapped her. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. Chloe spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "She's right, Mom," she said, not looking at me, but at our mother. "Ellie is right. You've always done this. You've always made excuses for me, always cleaned up my messes. It didn't help me. It just taught me that I could do whatever I wanted and there would never be any real consequences." I laid out the terms of the deal I had made with Chloe. And then I laid out my new terms for them. "Things are going to change," I announced, my voice steady and strong. "I have offered Chloe a path forward, a difficult one that requires work and accountability. And part of that accountability is that the two of you are going to stop enabling her. The bank of Mom and Dad is closed. No more bailouts. No more excuses. She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet." I looked from my mother to my father, holding their gaze. "And you need to accept that my relationship with my sister has been permanently and irrevocably altered by this. Being family does not mean tolerating abuse. And what she did was abuse. That dinner didn't magically fix our broken family. In fact, it shattered the comfortable, lifelong illusion of it that my parents had so desperately clung to. But for the very first time, we were all standing together in the cold, hard rubble of the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was a foundation upon which something real and honest could finally be built. A year can change everything. It can feel like a lifetime and the blink of an eye all at once. I stood in the garden Mark had so lovingly planted, watching the Texas bluebonnets and Indian paintbrushes sway in the gentle spring breeze. It was the first anniversary of his death, a date on the calendar I had been dreading for months, a landmark I didn't know how I would survive. But as I stood there, the ache in my chest was more of a dull, familiar throb than the sharp, stabbing, breathless pain it had once been. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had changed its shape. It no longer consumed me, no, it was simply a part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was now. So much had changed in those 365 days. The trust fund for Noah was established and being managed impeccably by a third-party trustee from Arthur's firm. It was a silent, steady presence in his life, ensuring his cardiologist appointments were always covered and that his future education was secure. His heart condition, I was relieved to learn from his doctors, was manageable with proper care and medication. He was growing into a happy, rambunctious, curious toddler who was obsessed with dinosaurs and could say my name, Anui. To everyone's astonishment, most of all mine, Chloe had actually stuck to the terms of our agreement. It had not been a smooth or easy path for her. There had been tears and tantrums and moments where I was sure she would fail. But she hadn't. A year of intensive, twice-weekly therapy had helped her begin to confront the deep-seated issues of jealousy, insecurity, and self-sabotage that had ruled her entire life. She found a stable, full-time job as an office manager at a large dental practice, a job with health insurance and a regular paycheck. She was attending her financial counseling sessions and, for the first time in her adult life, was living on a budget and paying her bills on time. Our relationship remained formal, but it was peaceful. The raw wound of her betrayal had scarred over, leaving something smooth and tough in its place. I saw Noah every other weekend. We'd go to the Zilker Park, ride the miniature train, or visit the Science Museum. We didn't pretend to be the close, giggling sisters my mother had always dreamed we would be. We might never be. But we had found a way to coexist, to co-parent my nephew with a quiet, respectful distance. And for Noah's sake, that was enough. My parents, after the shock of our family reckoning, had slowly, painfully, begun to change as well. My mother still struggled to accept that she couldn't just fix everything with a casserole and a hug. But they had stopped enabling Chloe. They were learning to support her in a healthier way, with encouraging phone calls instead of checks, with praise for her accomplishments instead of excuses for her failures. The grief support group I had joined in the dark, early days had become my lifeline. A dozen strangers, all of us unwilling members of a club no one wants to join, had become my closest friends. We were bound by the common, unspoken language of loss. We celebrated small victories, like making it through a holiday without breaking down, and we held each other up through the inevitable setbacks. We understood each other in a way no one else possibly could. To honor Mark in a way that felt meaningful and lasting, I used a portion of his life insurance to establish the Mark Preston Legal Education Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide full-ride scholarships to underprivileged students from Texas who wanted to go to law school but lacked the means. It gave me a profound sense of purpose, seeing his legacy of integrity and kindness live on in the careers of bright, idealistic young people who would bring so much good into the world. And then, unexpectedly, there was David. I met him at a fundraiser for the foundation 6 months after the confrontation with Chloe. He was a tenured history professor at the University of Texas, specializing in the American West. He was thoughtful and kind, with a quiet, dry sense of humor and warm, intelligent eyes. He didn't remind me of Mark, and for that, I was grateful. He was his own person. We started as friends, grabbing coffee to discuss foundation business. Slowly, cautiously, it blossomed into something more. He knew my whole story. He knew about Mark, about Chloe, about everything. He understood that my heart had scars, deep ones, and that loving me meant loving the person I had become, scars and all. He never tried to replace Mark, he simply, respectfully, made space for himself beside the permanent, honored place Mark would always have in my heart. We were taking it slow, but for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt a genuine flicker of hope for my own future. I looked out at the vibrant field of blue and red wildflowers Mark had planted, knowing he'd put those seeds in the rich Texas soil, hoping to see them bloom the following spring. He never got to. But I was here. I was seeing them for him. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he would be proud of the woman I had been forced to become in his absence. Standing there in that sun-drenched garden, with the scent of warm earth and wildflowers in the air, I reflected on everything my husband had taught me. He had taught me not just in our 11 beautiful years together, but even after he was gone. His incredible foresight, his decision to create that disaster prep kit, had been my shield and my sword when I was at my most vulnerable. His meticulously kept journal had validated my reality, my truth, when even my own parents had tried to dismiss it as exaggeration. His unwavering love had protected me, a tangible force that transcended even death itself. This entire, agonizing ordeal taught me some incredibly hard and valuable lessons. I learned that family relationships, like gardens, are not self-sustaining. They need constant tending, weeding, and sometimes, the construction of strong, tall fences to remain healthy. I learned that documentation, something that seems so cold and impersonal, isn't just a legal precaution. Sometimes, it's the ultimate act of love, a way to protect the people you leave behind from the chaos and cruelty of the world. I learned that forgiveness is not a simple switch you can flip. It's a messy, complicated, and deeply personal process. And it does not, under any circumstances, require you to forget or to allow toxic, harmful patterns to continue in your life. And the hardest lesson of all, the one that still stings to admit, sometimes the people you are biologically programmed to expect protection from are the very ones you need protection from the most. But through the searing fire of that betrayal and the crushing weight of my grief, I also learned about my own strength. A strength I never knew I had. I had faced my sister's monstrous lies head-on. I had navigated the complexities of the legal system. I had made excruciating, life-altering decisions about the future of my family. I had done all of this while my heart was shattered into a million pieces. I had found a way to honor my husband's memory not by remaining frozen in the past, a silent monument to our lost life, but by building a new life on the powerful foundation of the love and respect he had given me. The bluebonnets and daffodils swayed in the gentle spring breeze, resilient and beautiful after a long, hard, and cold winter. Grief is like that, I think. It's not a straight, linear path to getting over it. It's a series of seasons. There is the harsh, bleak winter of initial loss. But then comes the slow, tentative thaw of spring, with its unexpected moments of new growth and fragile beauty. I am not the same woman I was before Mark died, before my sister's betrayal ripped my world apart. I'm stronger in some ways, certainly more cautious in others. But ultimately, I am more authentic. I know who I am, what I stand for, and what I will and will not tolerate in my life. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals are the ones that force us to find a strength, a core of steel, that we never even knew we had. If there is one single thing I would share with anyone out there who is facing a devastating betrayal within their own family, it is this: protect yourself. First and always. Protect yourself with documentation, with legal counsel if you need it, and with strong, unwavering, and unapologetic boundaries. The people who truly love and respect you will understand and honor those boundaries. And the ones who don't? They were never safe for you to begin with. Have you ever had to establish difficult, painful boundaries with members of your own family? How did you find the strength to navigate those necessary but heartbreaking conversations? Please, share your experiences in the comments section below. Hearing each other's stories, knowing that we are not alone in these struggles, is a powerful thing. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps me continue to share these difficult but important lessons about life, loss, and resilience. Thank you for listening. And remember, healing is not a straight line, but it is always, always possible.